Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexandria. I am the coordinator for programming and education here at the museum. This program today that we have is our monthly Think and Drink series. We are able to provide this due to a grant from the Green Bay Packers Foundation, so we are very grateful to be able to receive that. But today we have a very special speaker, Dr. Susan Langley. She is an underwater archaeologist. She has been in this field for over 30 years, working with the state of Maryland. She is currently an adjunct professor at the St. Mary's College of Maryland, correct, Susan?
Yep.
There. And she has worked throughout the world providing her knowledge. So she will be starting off from here and take on from the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad you're all having libations. That's always a good audience who are well lubricated. This is my 50th year diving, and I am retiring from the state at the end of July and moving much, much closer to you, moving up back home to Canada and to Southern Ontario. So maybe I'll be able to get over more often. It's been a while since I've been to Wisconsin, so I'd like to do that. I'm going to talk about my dissertation topic, which is existing as a book in 4 cases at my house in Canada, where I hope to sit down and finally finish the darn thing. So let's, without further ado, let me see if I can get this to work. It's a slightly different system than I'm used to. Hang on. It's not loving me. Okay, just a minute. Let me try and start over again then. Present. Got to learn these things. Share screen. All right. Sharing the screen. Oh dear. Window. We'll get there. And it's not showing my PowerPoint. Oops. I don't know if I'm getting this or not. Hang on a second. Oh, there we are. Okay. Science. Hang on. Are we there?
Yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you. I put both my emails on the bottom. Please feel free to reach out. Obviously, the one in the middle is good till the end of July. The other is my personal one. So please feel free to get in touch. But this is something I'm really passionate about. So if I run long, just drink more. So we're going to talk about what the Titanic, the Bible, and Superman have in common. And it's commonly known as Operation Habbakuk. It was formerly Operation GE1, Project Habbakuk, but we won't split this. And this is our protagonist. Geoffrey Pike was one of the last of the Victorian boffins. And he does look a bit eccentric. And he was quite eccentric in many ways. But he was one of those borderline genius eccentrics and misunderstood by a lot of people. He's often written off as, crazy. There's a lot of hypotheses about what was really wrong with him. I think manic depression was easily one. Possibly bipolar, possibly temporal lobe epilepsy. There's lots of speculation, but very, very smart man. There's some great biographies written, so I won't go into too much of it. His father died young, as he was an attorney, and his mother left her rather in tight and straits and circumstances, which she didn't like. They did not have good relationship with her children. She forced him to wear, Orthodox Jewish clothing. They weren't Orthodox, to a very conservative British school. So you can imagine, years later, when he was invited back as the graduation speaker, he basically said everything he really thought, which was, always admirable about how he felt there. He did go to Cambridge. I mean, he's a very, very brilliant person. World War I breaks out, and he convinces the editor of the Daily Mail that he would be a great spy. And he is finally, after much pestering, at least a correspondent, but he really wanted to be a spy. And he was captured within a week. And this is World War I. So there weren't concentration camps as such. They were being held at Ruhleben horse track. And it wasn't that great. He developed illnesses that plagued him the rest of his life. But the interesting thing is, he and one other chap were the only people who ever escaped. And he tried to write coded messages to tell others how to do it in the newspaper articles, but they were so abstruse, no one else ever figured it out. So the only one. And this book, To Rule a Ben and Back, is the only thing he ever actually published, despite cases and cases and cases of documents. And he would get into writing mania and fill reams of foolscap. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But so this is one of the things. And we'll probably spend a bit too long talking about him because he is written off as a loony so often that it really bears justifying some of his genius. 1918, he marries this woman, Margaret Chubb. They separated in the 30s when he would go off and disappear and live in, people's greenhouses or whatever. They never divorced. She became in her own right an activist for family planning. And there's actually a Margaret Pike Trust in Britain and whatnot. Their son, David, I always had it in my head that he died was very small when his father died, and I was wrong. He ultimately took his own life in 1948, but his son had been working with him. He was like 27, 28, and ended up marrying his father's secretary. I met him when he was older, has a string of honors after his name, including, commander of the British Empire, etc. He was an endocrinologist and worked a lot with children, studying twins and whatnot. So brains run in the family. One of the things that Pike did is he was looking at the stock market, and this is the 20s, right? Roaring 20s, stock market's booming. He said, this can't be that difficult. And in short order, he cornered a third of the world tin market, to the point that there were actually underworld characters. They had a code name for him. I think it was like Candlestick or something. And they were talking about how they were going to deal with the candlestick and things like that. And one of the things he did with his money is they opened a school. It was called the Malting House School. And this is an old malting house for making malt, where you sprout the malt to make beer and ale. And the malting house. And they turned it into a school. And it was very much they hired one of the first very prominent female child psychologists, and they basically didn't have a big criteria or a curriculum. It was the children will learn by doing things, and there was a film made about it, and it didn't play well. It was sort of like these feral children are running amok, but it was very much the kind of school I went to in the 60s. So and I'm still here, so I think we're okay. But the kids did a lot of interesting things. However, instead of leaving it to his teachers, Pike started inserting himself. The money, we're hitting the Depression now, the money's running out, and the school ultimately closed. It's now a dormitory for Darwin College at Cambridge. But so he's not dim. I mean, the man could do this sort of thing. Second World War breaks out, and he's trying to find ways to assist the war effort. And so he develops this. It was actually known as Operation Plow, and this was known as an all-terrain weasel. And he's using the Archimedes screw to make these devices that could move over tundra and move, because they were worried about Norway. The Russians were coming in. They were trying to protect the fuel stations, and he had some of his ideas were a bit off the wall. After they dropped these, he said, we'll just cover them with tents. And the tents will say officers' latrine, because there's only enlisted men up there and they'll never use the officers' latrine. And that was how he proposed hiding them. So he was a bit zany at times. These, Susan, of course, sorry?
Hi, your PowerPoint isn't moving. Can you update that?
Okay, I'm not sure how to do that. Let me back up. Let me stop sharing for a moment. I don't know how to fix this. Let me try again. Slideshow from the beginning. Is it moving at all now?
We can't see it. You got to share the screen.
Oh, all right. I thought it was. Hang on. Gosh. Sorry, I really don't know this system. Let me try again. Present. There's window.
Okay.
Right. Is this showing? Is this me? Can you hear me? Is this showing at all?
I can hear you, but it doesn't seem to be presenting right now.
All right, let me try something else. Can you see it this way? Let me see. If I don't do it as a slideshow, I'm trying to see, can you see it in the PowerPoint format?
I can't, no.
Oh, that's not the right way to do that. Okay.
If you go back to the share screen, were you
Right.
able to make your PowerPoint like full screen?
I was, yeah, it was full screen.
It wasn't really going through on our end.
I'm at entire screen. I'm at window, like you said, go to window, go to,
Go entire screen. Try going entire screen.
all right. But I have to also find it. Hang on, it seems to have vanished. Hang on, I've got to get my PowerPoint back up. All right. All right. Now let me try that again. All right, so entire screen and but it's not letting me share. It just said I can cancel, but I can't share. Hang on a minute.
You might have to select it.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there, it's on share. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, let me see if slideshow from the beginning. It covers my whole screen, so I can't tell. Is it moving? Is it moving now?
Full screen for us.
It's on full screen for me, so I can't see anything else. Is it moving?
It's not.
Can I give a suggestion if that's
Yeah.
okay? I would suggest for her to hit present. She might not see us, but then she could be able to see her screen.
No, I'm seeing the screen. I'm not seeing you. I'm just seeing the full screen, but it's not moving, apparently.
So somebody suggested that you hit present in PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Let me try that. Hang on. I'm
You would
gonna have to take it out of there.
Hey, there we go. There we go. That changed the screen there.
Well, I'm looking for present. I've got slideshow. I'm looking for present though. Sorry. I am not sure what else to do here. Because it is full screen for me. When I make it full screen, you aren't seeing it move. That's why I'm curious. If I, oops. Oh shoot! Now I'm trying to see you. Does it move for you if I just?
So you're on
Then I
the
can't-
second slide right now.
Yeah, but I can't. The animations will not work in this.
Slideshow.
Slideshow, yeah, click that.
So if you click on the slideshow,
Drop down
what
to
options does it give you?
Let's see it. Just gotta click it.
Did you click it?
I'm on the slideshow for me.
Okay. What options does it give you?
I get to play it from the beginning, from the current slide.
She'll have like start from beginning. Like
Yeah, try hitting the start from beginning.
And now it's full screen.
Okay. I think it'll work. Can you try switching to the third slide? We're on the second slide right now.
Are you on this slide with Pike?
Yes.
And it's showing just him and some text.
Yes. Well, we can still
And
see
now
it.
you're getting the book. Like, did it animate?
It did not, no.
Because that's gonna it won't work. Everything has got animated on every slide. Oh dear. Because if I can see, I can leave it here and run the show, but it's not gonna. We're gonna lose a lot of things, I think. Well, I can try. I can try from here. If you can see it, I can try and do it from here, from this.
Okay, if that works for you, yeah, I'm not sure why it's not switching. Usually it just switches just fine.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was trying to. All right, let me see if I can see. This one is not, and I can't do anything on the screen with this. Like if I hit slideshow. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe we're getting something. Hang on a minute. No, now it's not letting me do anything. All right. I'm so sorry.
All right.
No, let me try. It is sharing, but it's not letting me do anything now. All right. If we can you see this one the way it is?
We can see the slide with type.
Yeah, because when I get here, though, it won't let me move anything. Okay, so I've got to, God, present. I'm trying this one. I have no slides, and that's not working.
First tiny icon, just to the
Okay.
right. Just the
Right there. That one?
No, next one.
Okay, that one.
Yes.
Okay. At the bottom of the PowerPoint screen, there's the slider icon that goes back and forth at the bottom of your PowerPoint.
I don't have that showing. Hang on a minute. Let me.
Okay, yeah. You want?
No, I can't move this. I can't move anything. I've just got the mute stop cam settings bar.
Okay. Are you able to see like your PowerPoint menu?
I can. My PowerPoint isn't doing anything. I can't make it do anything. That's the problem. Unless I put it into the other format, and if I do that, then it doesn't seem to be moving. Let me try stop screen and try this again.
Okay.
Oh man, share screen. Window, PowerPoint, share.
Because at the bottom of your screen, there, before you click on slideshow, if you go down to the bottom, there's that slider where it says like 65%.
Oh yeah, right there. Yeah.
On the first icon to the left.
This one. Is that working for you? It's gone to a full screen for me.
We did not do it at our end.
Okay, because I'm back on the first slide.
Okay, try switching it to the third slide, because we're on the second slide still.
That's the third slide.
Okay, yeah, we're still seeing just the second one, unfortunately.
No, I just moved it.
Just switch to the third slide.
Yeah, but there's no animation. It's just showing you a still slide.
Yeah.
You don't have a date yet.
I don't know how to deal with this. Like I can do this and show you the pictures, but can you see that at least?
I can, yes.
Okay, maybe what I can do is move these down. All right, we can do it, but it's going to be kind of jury rigged. So,
all right, sounds like a plan. I'm going to let Alex know to turn back on the sound, and I'll hand it back to you. All right,
we'll do what we can. I'm back up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, we're going to try something different. I do apologize. It will not work in slideshow, so I'm going to show it to you in the built format, and I may have to physically move some images around, but I did mention that here's our protagonist. This is Jeffrey Pike. And as I say, well, you heard everything I'd said. Here, I'll just move this over. This is where he was held at Ruhleben racetrack during the First World War. The volume is the only book he ever wrote. He, as I say, produced reams of notes. And in fact, he wrote in foolscap. They actually assigned a scientist to distill all his notes down to one page for the high command during the Second World War. And we'll move on to that in a moment. I mentioned the Malting House School, but let me just move things for a moment. That's Pike with his wife, Margaret, and his son, David, who, as I said, became a famous endocrinologist. He did not die. David died, I think, in 2001 or something. So I did, as I say, had the chance to meet him as a grad student, but I didn't really think to ask all the questions. You don't know what to ask at the time, and you're also wrapped up in getting your own work done. So I wished I'd had, the foresight to ask more questions. And this was Pike and his wife early on in their marriage in 1918. They set up, as I said, he cornered the market in tin. He made a ton of money, used it to open this school, the Malting House School, and then hired a brilliant child psychologist to run it. And they did let the kids sort of learn by doing, was the whole philosophy of it. The Depression hit, he loses a lot of money, but he still wants to help out with the war effort. And he starts coming up with all these ideas. And one of the ideas they were looking for was how to get across tundra in northern, in Scandinavia, where all the fuel dumps were up in Minsk and whatnot. And he came up with this device called, it was Operation Plow, and that was using an Archimedes screw. Sorry, I was tossing all my notes there for a moment. It was known as the all-terrain weasel, and it worked. But the British were then trying to share the information with the U.S., who started developing it, and the Brits, and putting proper, cat tracks, if you will, on them. And so it was considered viable. It did work, and they did develop them, of course. Here's an American one. I think the other one, they're both American actually, and. As I was saying, his idea to protect them was they would drop them in by parachute and then cover them with tents that said officer's latrine, because there were only enlisted men in that area and they would never go in an officer's latrine, and that's how they'd hide them. But obviously, so he had his moments that weren't maybe as quite as straight as the rest, but these are still viable ideas, and in fact went on to be developed into, I do apologize for having to move all this stuff, they were developed into this sort of snow crawler, which were still being used in the 1960s. I went out myself to, this was out on the Columbia ice field in Alberta, and this is what you rode around the Columbia ice field in. And there's still a few around, but they of course have more gone to something like this a little bit more efficient and sexier. But he did actually, develop a lot of things. The other big idea he had that you might be familiar with, even if you don't think you are, was the idea of developing a crack unit of American and Canadian soldiers, sort of the very first SAS, if you will, from Britain. They developed into the SAS and to other, agent or famous troops in the U.S. as well. And so they were called the Black Devil Brigade. Usually it was just the Devil, the Black Devil. They trained in Helena, Montana. And they were both U.S. and Canadian, as you can see. And they were known for carrying these cards, and they would leave them on anyone who was killed that sort of said, we've been here. The worst is yet to come. And they had something like a 600% turnover rate, in the sense that any man who got injured and was taken for a treatment, usually what happens is when you're healed, you're put into a pool and sent where you're needed. They would run away and go back to their own troops. And they were serving in Italy. My father didn't know them. He served in Italy, but they were in that area, as well as other Northern Europe and whatnot, but well known from Italy. There were two films, one from 1968, The Devil's Brigade, with William Holden, Cliff Robertson. The other one you may be more familiar with is the Inglourious Bastards from 2009. Both of these were based on these troops. And you can see that there was an older memorial, and you can see it hasn't changed much, except maybe it's grown up a bit more. But this is the one still out there. It's now marked. The highway from, I believe it's Lethbridge in southern Alberta down to Helena is known as the 1st Special Service Force, which is what they became known as. Black Devil Brigade was their own story. This book was the nephew of someone who served in it, wrote that. And I did not see when that coin came out. I would have loved to have had one. They did have a commemoration in 2013 of some of the few last members of this outfit. And so I as I said, I'm spent a little long on this, but I'm very passionate about it, because there's just, everybody writes him off so easily. And he really did have some brilliant ideas. But let's get to the crux of our story here. And again, I do have to apologize. This is our link with the Titanic. There's our vessel. I do apologize for having to move everything. Let me just fuss this around a little bit. Titanic, of course, sank in April 15th, 1912. And right after, they developed something called the International Ice Patrol. And the idea was, as you can see, it's now fallen to the Coast Guard. Coast Guard weren't really formalized initially, but they were still part of the Treasury and the Life-Saving Service. And I think it was 1914 they became together as the Coast Guard. But they became the basis of the International Ice Patrol. And they sent them out, and the purpose was to find and destroy all those evil icebergs that'll never sink our ships again. And when they did this, they found out that you can't sink icebergs. You can hit them with incendiary bombs. You knock a chunk off, they roll over. You all know how much is below the surface on an iceberg, and I'll show that in a moment. But you can see the Coast Guard did, it still does this. They are still the International Ice Patrol. And then once a year, on the anniversary of the loss of the Titanic, they do go out, and from a helicopter or watercraft, they do drop a wreath every year. So this is our connection with the Titanic is the study of ice came to the fore after the Titanic, and they started making these really interesting, studies and discovering that, you can't sink an iceberg. So they, well, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. I'll just leave it there. At this time also, this is a German map, and it shows the sectors the U-boats would patrol. The U-boats would sit in the center of the Atlantic, just outside the capability of most of the aircraft. You could send a convoy across, but if you wanted aircraft to go out and patrol around with it, they didn't have the capacity. They can fly out, drop a payload of bombs, but they couldn't stay out. They needed somewhere to refuel. So this became known as Wolfpack Alley. And of course, during the Second World War, both wars actually, but particularly the second one, huge loss of shipping to these U-boats. So how can we deal with this? How can we, refuel these vessels or these aircraft so they can, do a better job? This is where Pike came up with this idea, and he'd been trying to gain interest with a number of the upper echelon, and he got the ear of Louis Mountbatten, who was the first Sea Lord, and the one that was blown up by the IRA a number of years ago. But Lord Louis Mountbatten was he thought outside the box. He was interested in people who other people wrote off. He bucked the Admiralty a lot, and he had a little bit of they didn't move him up. He felt they did his dad dirt, because Mountbattens were, of course, Battenberg. They were German, and during the First World War, his father was first Sea Lord and was forced to step down. So it was his goal to make it that high. So he didn't take a lot of flack, and he believed Pike. He set up a whole stable of scientists who would study glaciology, and he took the idea to Churchill as well and said, why don't we haul down these icebergs? And Churchill's favorite words were, he talks about it here, but he kept calling it a lozenge of ice. And he said, we're going to pull one of these down. If they can't sink them, we'll just cut a big flat one out. And he thought the Arctic was flat, and occasionally it does look flat. But we'll cut this lozenge of ice out. We'll tow it to the mid-Atlantic, and then our aircraft can land and refuel and take off. Well, you need a 50-foot freeboard to launch an aircraft off of a vessel. So you need 50 feet of ice sticking up, flat ice. And of course, as I was saying before, with most icebergs, you've got a lot more below the surface than you see on the surface. And sometimes it's a little bit obvious. You can sort of see it, but they roll constantly. So you would need something flat, but most of them aren't flat. They're shaped like this, and so it was a good idea, but they were trying to figure out a way to make it work. Because if you had 50 feet above, you got 500 feet below. And so as I say, they had a lot of scientists working on this, and Pike would get in. Here's our other hero, Lord Mountbatten. He became not only first Sea Lord, but the chief of combined operations. They later pulled him out and sent him off to India because they basically wanted him out of there. Didn't like him messing too much. The Admiralty was very conservative. But Pike came up with the idea. They started talking about, well, can we then, could we hollow out an iceberg? Well, then you lose the inherent strength that you had if resisting torpedoes and incendiary bombs and all these things. And so they started trying to figure out a way to make a battleship or a refueling depot, a military vessel out of ice. And how could you hollow it out, but keep it strong enough that it could still resist all this? And they actually got this stable of scientists. And these are two photos. Mats Perutz was one of the last to live. These were all boys back in the day. And, all of them as youngsters. Some don't change too much. And these guys were working on all of these ideas. Jack Chalmers was in Canada. He was running the National Research Council. Herman Francis Mark, he was the one who actually came up with one of the viable solutions, as did William Cook. William Cook was at the National Research Council, and I actually got to interview him. I didn't know Perutz was still alive, or I might have had a chance with him. The others I didn't get to before they passed. But when I met Cook, he was, I came in with I felt like Alice's Restaurant, my circle, 8x10 color glossies with circles and arrows and maps and drawings. And he said, "I'm so sorry, I'm completely blind." And I'm like, if I drew really, really big, but what they did, how they worked this was, it was going to be massive, and Okay, there wasn't one hiding under there. And this is where the Bible comes in. The nickname for it was Habakkuk. And this is spelt like the Old Testament prophet. And it was going to be a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you. This is a normal battleship. This is how big a Habakkuk was going to be, 2,000 feet long. And instead of having one motor, they were going to power it with all these nacelles, aircraft nacelles. So it was going to be very slow. But if you couldn't sink it, did it matter? So this was the idea. And then they started saying, well, how can we hollow it out if we can't make one big block of ice? So this was actually published in the London Illustrated News after the war. So it became public news quite early, and I was able to have a huge poster of it. So what Cook developed is this. It's known as the jacket system. It's this sort of rib cage of refrigerative tubing. The walls were going to be 40 feet thick, but instead of just ice, they were going to be made out of a slurry, a mixture of wood pulp and ice, which Herman Marx came up with at Brooklyn Polytechnic. And it was so hard. You could turn it on a lathe, you could hammer it, you could saw it, but it was very slow to melt. And if they made the walls 40 feet thick and they had a way to refreeze it at sea with the refrigerative tubing, a torpedo would make a 4-foot hole. It's 40 feet thick, and they could refreeze that at sea. So they decided they needed 1,000 of these within a year. And this is now 42, they got the approval. 43, they started work on the model. So they decided they would test it out and they would build a model of it in Canada because it was out of the theater of war. It had, they chose, I'll show you in a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just move down. Here's what it was going to be, that close-up of that cutaway. So now it's becoming basically an aircraft carrier. It developed very quickly from a refueling station to Habakkuk 1, 2, 3, and 3 was up to 3E or D, which was a trimaran design. But they came up with this idea, and I'm going to use this. And when he developed this wood slurry ice solution, he named it Pikecrete for Jeffrey Pike. So concrete, but Pikecrete. And so wood pulp, and it was, I think white spruce was the preferred wood pulp. And I think it was like a 10% mixture, which doesn't seem like that much, but it seemed to work. So it was going to be 200 feet high, 300 feet at the beam, and 2,000 feet long. This is another cutaway from another magazine. I don't think there's anything under that. Sorry. So they decided they would take it out to Canada, and we're in Western Canada here. Jasper National Park up here in the Rocky Mountains. And there's a close-up. We have a lot of national parks, fortunately, in that area. And it was going to be built in, this is the town of Jasper, before it was burned last year or the year before. This is Patricia Lake. This is Pyramid Lake. And there's a little tiny X right there. That's where the model is still. And so they built a 1/10 scale model, sort of. You can hardly see it, but there's some floats out here that mark the model. And I was put onto it at a conference when someone walked up to me and said, I heard a weird story. I was at another conference and these people were saying that there's an aircraft made out of ice at the bottom of Patricia Lake. And we just looked at each other and I said, it can't be made out of ice. And he said, I know, that's the story. Well, it had gotten garbled, but I found an article where 2 divers in 1965 had found the model. And so we had an idea where it was, and we went out then we started looking at the photographs. So they got the word to try and build this. It's only 60 feet long, so it's not a full 1/10 scale model. It is 1/10 for depth and width, but not for length. So they, goodness me, come here, you. Okay, we'll have another attack on this. Get a little. So they laid down some plywood on the lake surface. And this is just in the winter. The lake gets 2 feet. The ice gets 2 feet thick on Patricia Lake. And they started building the frame. They started using lake ice as a block, as blocks to, and then welding it with crushed snow and ice and then water. And the idea was they ordered all this piping, and they were going to pipe brine around it because you may know brine, salt water does not freeze at 32 degrees. It freezes at like 28. So they can actually get it colder by using salt water to help freeze it, like when you make ice cream the old way with brine. Well, they didn't end up, the piping arrived so damaged they couldn't do that. They ended up building the frame, as we can see here. And And these, it was cut off at the bottom. That wasn't me. And then these are grainy because they are old. They laid piping across the bottom, and I'll show you a drawing later, but they used Cook's model, and they put piping across the bottom and up the sides, and they tarred it. It was so banged up when it arrived, they couldn't put anything but air through it. So they decided they would just use cold air, and they would use lake ice, because they had not Pikecrete was invented about 2 months into this project. So they didn't have it at the time. So they started out with lake ice. And they chose Jasper partly because it was out in the middle of nowhere, basically, at that time. It was a railhead because it was a bit touristy in peacetime. And they had a large camp of conscientious objectors. So Mennonites and Doukhobors were doing most of the work. And fortunately, we had 2 gentlemen who were still alive, came out and gave us a hand later. So here it is with the flooring is in, they're putting the piping up the sides. They filled in between with blocks of sort of bitumen, and they were just given stuff to work with. There's a whole train carload of vermiculite. And when I said, what did you do with it? They said, we didn't know what we were supposed to do with it. So we put it in the asphalt, in the bitumen. They said, we didn't know what we were doing. We thought we didn't even know what we were building. We called it Noah's Ark. So you can see them still working on it here. There was a lot of hostility between the park manager, who was a Major Wood, and Dr. Mackenzie, who was running the actual field project. And they would send all these tattling notes on each other back to the National Research Council. And one of them would play his bagpipes every morning to annoy the other. And it was just like listening to the old paleontological wars where they would raid each other's camps and things. So we had all these Doukhobors and Mennonites working on this. This is it when it was going in. Now we're seeing this box. It's actually full of ice now, and it was starting to bow up. So they cut it loose around the edges. So it's actually floating. And this box in the center, and I'll show you a better photo, is where all the refrigerative machinery was put. This was the one time Pike came to the site. They put him on a train, and someone actually came with him, because the eccentric side of him was, if somebody asked him for his ticket, he would hand them whatever was in his hand, a secret document, an envelope, whatever. So they sort of had a keeper with him, and they came out to view the site. And this was the point when the government started, kind of worrying about him and saying, oh, we don't know if we want him involved. And he kind of got sidelined, and he never really forgave them. But again, he never came back to the site or back to the States or Canada at all. So they worked on this through from about December of 43 into around May. And I have pictures. Here it is, I think, in the winter, and here it is in the summer. So they put a roof on it, more to protect the ice from the elements. They laid sisal blankets over it, and they put wood chips on it. And I got very excited because I was finding a profusion of white spruce chips in there. And this was before I got the word that that Pikecrete wasn't invented yet. So I thought they did use it here. No, they just went to the local lumber yard and got whatever was available. We're in the Rockies. It was a lot of white spruce. So unfortunately, that wasn't, oh, well, but it was there. And then what ended up happening, I'll pause here before I show you the underwater versions, but I will go on, is that they figured it will work. Okay, we can do this. It did circulate the air. And actually, I will show you this part, the circulation, because, as I say, they followed Cook's model. Move this over, and did put the piping across the bottom. They put it up the sides like here. And then the refrigeration unit, all this is ice. All this open area here is ice. Refrigeration unit sitting on it. And it's double walled. So the machinery would pump the air out through the inner pipes, and it would be returned through the outer wall pipes. So it was double walled. This is just the refrigeration unit showing where everything was. It was sort of another long longitudinal chamber under it that was like a crawlway or a manhole way. Then there was the, move this one over again. So this is what it looked like up close. You can sort of see the double walling here that the piping came in and out of. And then this is me crawling through one of these side vents where the fans had been taken out and looking up to one of the there's a catwalk up here around the top of the refrigeration unit. And so you can see it was quite clear there. This is down, it's sitting at an angle, and the, trying to move this over. Oops, all right, we'll just go on to the next one. the shallowest point was about 65 feet, but we're at 4,000 foot altitude. So you add 20 feet to everything. The lower corner was at about 100 feet. So it was down to 120. And considering the altitude we were at. Now, while this was going on, they actually were testing other ice, breaking points of ice and its elasticity and plasticity. This is Lake Louise. If you've ever been to out that way, you can still stay there. It's a big fancy hotel. This is one of the beams of ice. Oh, Lordy. This is one of the beams of ice that they were testing up at Lake Patricia. And here's some other ones. This was probably at Lake Louise, just a different angle. And they would put them up and they were mixing them with different substances. I don't think the other ones, it's the next one, such as charcoal and asphalt, trying to see what it was like. And then they were shooting at them. And I was lucky. Some divers told me they did find bent up shells. I never saw any. I didn't have a permit for collecting if we did, but we didn't. So this was an archival photo that I found at the National Archives in Canada, the National Research Council. So they did plain ice. Lac Beauvert is over by Jasper Park Lodge. If any of you've been out there, another fancy hotel up in Jasper. So they were testing, what it took to break it, both from stress, and mostly from ammunition, trying to just, test out how these worked. And so this is one of the more interesting aspects because not many people know about this. So it's going to be a whole chapter when I finally get retired and can write my book. They decided they were going to try and build the full-size models out in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And I'll get to that. But for comparison, they sent these back to show them. You can see they've got a Habbakuk 1 and a Habbakuk 2. One was 1,500 feet. The Habbakuk 2 was the one they really wanted to do, was the larger one. But they were showing it here in Gibraltar where it covered most of the airfield. Because two of their thoughts were, if they can't be sunk, can we get them in, and they aren't melting quickly, can we float them through Gibraltar and get them in, they couldn't be built there, but get them in to work in the Mediterranean. They also had thoughts, of using them for D-Day. Now, you may have seen the Mulberries where they came up with unrolling the chocolate bar docks and things like that. That's what they ultimately went for, because they were, as I say, they wanted to build 1,000 of these within a year. Churchill wanted 1,000 for his ongoing efforts. And they said they didn't think that was going to be very likely. Let me see, is there any? Yeah, here's where they wanted to build it in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. The labor force, it would have taken a huge number of people, about 2,000 people were you're working in shifts, of course, but around the clock to even get one or two of them to Churchill within the year. So he wasn't very happy about this. And it was Mountbatten who kind of had to explain all this. So when the Mackenzie from the National Research Council went with him to tell Churchill that, it would take a lot for the piping for all of these things. It would take a lot of metal that you need for aircraft and ships. It would take a huge amount of wood pulp that you need for paper and other war effort things. And we don't think we can get enough of them ready for you in time anyway. And Churchill was not at all happy to hear this. And they also had a spy scare in the middle of this. You can see between March 29th and April 1st in 43, and I just chose the Winnipeg Tribune because that was where someone else copied them from. They stuck these 4 Superman comic strips together and were sending them all around the country. And this is very official that they hatched out the parts that weren't important, in case you didn't know. But the theory was that how Superman saw this, these planes coming out of this iceberg, and this is the cross section, but this was the Germans had it. So then there was this big flurry of, who knows what we're doing out here? How did word get out? And then there was the close-up of what was proposed. So you had submarines on the bottom, anti-aircraft or ACAC guns on the middle, and aircraft launching on the top. And of course, Superman saves the day and destroys them all. But there was this big flurry, and it turned out it was an absolute coincidence. At the same time, they also had a gentleman show up in Ottawa at the Defense Department with his invention he wanted to give the government for the war effort. And it was basically centimetric radar, which was also being developed at the same time. So he got arrested, obviously was released, but here was this poor soul building it in his basement, trying to help the war effort. So there was this little scare. But what ultimately happened, and I'll show you my site in the next slides, is that they decided when you couldn't get all of these built in time, it wasn't going to work for D-Day. They also developed the VEL Liberator, which was a superior aircraft, had a greater range, but also it occurred to them that if you set up air bases in the Azores and in Iceland, both of which were islands and couldn't be sunk either, that might solve the problem. And so it kind of was made obsolete before it reached fruition. It was entirely possible. I had to work with Mythbusters years ago. And of course, when they wanted to make their model, they took big wads of newspaper flat and then froze it together. And then when they raced it across the lake very fast, it delaminated. And they said, well, see, that would never have worked. Well, no, because you didn't follow the recipe and you went too fast. And, so it was fully functional. So when I went to look at it, when we found it, this is the catwalk along the edge of the refrigeration chamber. And you can see the piping that's still there coming out of this side. I'm going to make some of these smaller. I'm afraid to show you some of the other parts. So when I got down to the refrigeration unit, I'm now sitting at the 120 feet looking up at that corner. So the pipes are coming out all the way around like a spider. Sorry about this. Is biota, a backscatter from biota. But the walls themselves were not in quite such good shape. Here's part of the catwalk. Again, that's my datum line for recording it. But what we end up with, think of a big shoebox. And if you tipped it on it toward one side and then tilted it a little bit so the one corner towards you is the highest, that's the corner of that wall. So that's the west wall, the short end of the shoebox sticking up. And that's at about 65 feet. Then the east wall, the other short end of the shoebox, just fell outward. And you can see these big chunks of that bitumen that was between these studs that were holding it up. And then the south wall had collapsed in. So the long side of the shoebox has fallen in. You can see where this bitumen's folded over, but it's still sitting on top. The other side of the long side is the farthest downhill into the lake. The lake is very, very deep, over 1,000 feet deep. So we're perched up at, 120. And and I'm telling you this now because this was in 1984, 85, 86, when I started working on it. And we had this model. And on the one wall, on top of this wall, I actually found initials because we can't have nice things. But it was the two divers from 1965 who'd carved their names on. I had their initials. So that was kind of interesting. So it was in quite good shape, considering this was now, as I say, the mid-1980s. And there was still a lot of it left. And then we actually got together, there was the Alberta Underwater Archaeology Society and the park. I had the permit. They let us, and I'm sorry, this is an angle. So this is back in the days of film. You don't get to preview it. Someone else took this for me. We did put a plaque on it. And of course it's bilingual, just pointing out what it is. And it's at the shallowest corner. And I was asked to christen it. I don't think I put that. Oh, I did put it in. And I was appalled. They gave me a German beer. And I said, really? And we had it in a bag, but even so, it cut through the bag. So after we christened it, we had to stop and pick all the glass up. Definitely dry suit diving up there. It never gets warm. It's mountain lake, and I told you how deep we're going. But we did deploy that day. And but in 2005, I was asked to go back with a production company from Nova Scotia. National Geographic was sponsoring it. And it was called I'm going to try and find the name. I'll remember it anyway. But we went back and we managed to round up two of the guys. These are the two gentlemen who'd actually been conscientious objectors in the camp. And so they brought photos and were showing us everything they were doing. The series was called The Sea Hunters, and Clive Cussler was originally doing the intro and the outro, and then he had a falling out with National Geographic. So it was just the series. I think you can still buy it online. This was season 5, episode 7 that we were. And they were looking at maps and they were watching. Now they sat up here and we went in the water with a live feed camera. And they said, we're getting up there and we don't remember what we had for lunch, but I can tell you how thick those studs are and how far away. And now if you go to your left, you should see. And they were really, really helpful in doing this for us. So the episode came out in 2006, Ship of Ice. And this was us going through photos that they'd brought. Unfortunately, we've lost both of these gentlemen now. And this was us getting ready. Two of these gentlemen that's a father-son team, and the Fletchers, and they do a lot of this. It's Warren and Mike Fletcher. You'll see them on a lot of dive adventure shows. They aren't archaeologists, but they do an enormous amount of diving. And those circles are because, let me just move us over for a moment. I went over in, found this the first year I was there. That's when I got a hint. Okay, it was originally cabled to the land. They decided that when this vessel wasn't going to work and they weren't going to use Habbakuk, they took the roof off, they took the machinery out, and you couldn't do anything else. It was one giant ice cube. So they left it floating until the end of the summer, and it finally subsided. When I went back with these guys in 2005, this was how far that eye was out. So there'd been an enormous amount of erosion, and the lake had dropped considerably as well. So here's our site. When we went back, that whole unit, remember I told you about that one, that's that one wall that was sitting on top with the billow. It has slid way down. It's pushed the refrigeration unit off. It's broken up into, it looks like this now. It's like kindling. There's still some of the bitumen. There's still some piping. The interesting thing was that corner where I said we were a big spider and I was down at the lowest corner. I could actually get under it now and see other aspects of its construction. But that whole refrigeration unit is one thin piece of plywood now. That's all that was left between, I last dove it in 93, I believe, 1993 to 2005. Part of it was never built to last. Part of it was being loved to death. That one big wall that was still upright, I went around the other side of it. This is the Habbakuk on this side, the model. We went around the upright wall on the other side, and it was just covered in graffiti. So, can't have nice things. But so there isn't very much left of it these days. So we're glad we recorded it. I have video, I have photo. I am going to get a book out. And bless their little pointed heads, U-Haul made us a super graphic back in 2008. I still see these trucks. There's one in Annapolis. So I'm kind of like, if they offer you that one, don't take it. It's really, really old. Get a newer one. But we had a nice launch. They let us sign all over it. I was a little annoyed that I loaned them a lot of material and they used some things that I said, this is only for your information. It's not proprietary. I think this is a Spitfire. And we were like, no, it needs to be a Liberator. They had a Canadian flag on the back. And I'm like, that was 1967. You got to use a British one. But if you do go to the website, it's still there. You have to go to Super Graphics. You have to look up the Canadian Province series, and you can read all my data before I publish it, I guess. But you can read more about it. So that was kind of cool, and we enjoyed them doing that for us. So it was decent. That's one of their little 15-footers. I'm being terrified, but I'm probably going to drive a 26-footer. I'll have to get a Big Mama trucker shirt or something to do that. And just want to thank all those folks who were involved. And there were a lot more, people who came out and worked with me when we were doing the initial work. We went out and I said, how do you dive in Canada? And I didn't put these in because I don't know if we got a photo. We're walking out on first, I love it. You take your toboggan. And I thought, boy, this is Canadian. Then you put your chainsaw on your toboggan and a broom, like a good curling broom. And then you go out in the middle of the lake while it's booming away and you're hoping it's really not. It was 2 feet thick. And you sweep a good clear spot. And you chainsaw a triangle, and you need a triangle because the circle could pop back up and seal you under there. So you push a triangle under and you pin it. And then you take your dive gear off the toboggan and you go down diving with multiple safety lines and a lot of people. And we thought, great, we're going to get away from all that organic growth and backscatter. We'll get great photos. Do you know how dark it is with 2 feet of ice over you? We had to light everything. So anyway. Well, I tweaked our way through this, but I'm going to close this and maybe we can have a conversation. If you want me to go back and show you something, I can, but I'm going to quit sharing that and drop it down. So I hope you're all well liquored so that wasn't made you too seasick. We did our best.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Susan. Does anyone have any questions for Susan? Dr. Langley.
Were they ever functional as landing aircraft?
Do you think that they were?
Yeah, I got that. They never tested it that far. This model was as far as they got, and all they had on that was it was like 60 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 20 feet deep. So you could walk around the top. So they never got a chance to build a full one to test it. In theory, it worked great. It worked great with just regular ice and cold air. So if they were able to build a full-scale one using pykrete, they did test pykrete at Billingsgate Fish Market, the old one. It's not the one they use now. They did make some there as well. And there's two stories. One is true, one is apocryphal. When they made it there, Mountbatten took a chunk and took it to Churchill, who was out at his country house, Chartwell, in the bathtub. And he marched into the bathroom and threw it in the tub with him to show him that it didn't melt. And you say Churchill was not impressed, but he got out. He ended up sitting on the edge of the tub and making the water hotter and hotter to see what happened with it. And he became a supporter. That was how he got him on board. But the second story is I don't want to ruin Lord Mountbatten's autobiography. But Cook was there, and he said it never happened. But they, when they had the big meeting, not Yalta, of course, but the one in Ottawa, all the big wigs were in there, Stalin, the heads of state meeting about the war. And they said that Mountbatten brought a chunk in, took out his pistol, and fired it, and it ricocheted around the room, and the guards outside were like, "Oh my God, they've started shooting!" Said that never happened, but Mountbatten put it in his autobiography, so it's out there, and there's not much. Cook's dead, and I'm not important, so I guess it'll stay out there. I can put a footnote in my book, I guess. So it's true that Churchill had it in his bathtub, but it's not true they were shooting at it in Ottawa. In theory, it would have worked brilliantly. Again, would they have even had to refuel the Liberators? Maybe. But as you saw from those designs, whether it would have worked as actually an aircraft carrier. And one of the drawings actually, which I didn't put here, they were storing the planes vertically. And I was thinking all the oil is going to run to the front. You wouldn't store them vertically. You saw in the ones I showed you, they were all flat, and they were just, as they store them now. So in theory, it would have worked, but it wasn't tested.
Any other questions? Yes.
Were there any advances in technology that were made because of this project?
Crete, the development of pykrete, because after the war, it was used up in Nickel Rankin, like in Hudson Bay. Nickel Rankin mines and a few of the other areas up there actually made some and put it around their piers, because in the winter they'll get crushed. And so I had the opportunity to speak to the Alberta chapter of SNAME, the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers. And a lot of those guys were in the oil patch and were working up in the Beaufort. And what they do in the winter for I'm just lost it. What do you call them? Out in the Gulf and everything, you know what I mean? The ice islands that you have your wellheads and things on. What they would do is they put water cannon on, and they would bury them in ice to keep them from being crushed in the winter. And I said, wouldn't pykrete work? And they said, well, ice works really well as well. It's here. We've got a water cannon. We would have to bring in the actual wood chips to make it. So they said, it had limited use, but it did see use after the war. And that was probably, there were other things they studied in glaciology. They were looking at using ice caves for making bunkers out of and things. There were other studies that these scientists, Habbakuk was mainly, was kind of peripheral to this. And as I say, Pike would write these reams and reams, and Mountbatten called them pikeries, like fantasies or fakeries. He said, take that folio of pikeries and give it to Perutz and have him distill it down from like 30 pages of foolscap to 1 page that I'll read. So he did have to have a keeper, sort of. And it was and then what happened was Churchill persuaded the Americans to take on the idea of the project. And he said, maybe they could use it in the Pacific, because if it won't melt, they could use it against Japan. They could use it. And the Americans were like, hell no. But they weren't going to say that. Churchill, allies. So they very sweetly took it. And Pike kept saying, and I'll come with you. And they're like, no, you won't. We don't want him. So he got, and that was part of, I think, his manic depression as well. He did try some other, things after the war, but obviously by 47, 48, he was very much a recluse, doing some very, very eccentric things by that point, only seeing his secretary. I guess he saw his son periodically, but then when his secretary came he took an overdose one night. He shaved his beard off, took an overdose. He'd left 3 envelopes. one for her, one for his son, and I forget who the other one was for. At this point, I have to go back to his biography. And his son did sort of share it. And it was just that he felt that he was a failure, you know, like most of these people do. But he actually done. I mean, he did come up with the snow crawlers and, you know, a lot of other things that did, and the special services, a lot of things that did benefit. It was just this particular project didn't work out. Not that it couldn't have, but they're just too resource heavy, you know, for the time period. Somebody should build one now, and just for laughs, you know, we could do it.
How did you get started in your career?
I grew up in Sarnia, Ontario, which, if you don't know, is at the very tip of Lake Huron. It's a border town with Port Huron, Michigan. And I was working in a bar, getting ready to go to university, where I was not going to take archaeology because I was told, oh, you never get in the field. So I thought I'll do fine art history. And I was slinging beer. And two of the other guys who worked there, one guy worked there part-time, was a Coast Guard auxiliaryman. And he said, you ought to learn to dive with us. And he said, we'll teach you for free, but you got to volunteer for a couple of years and you get your gear at a discount. So I took up diving and learned to dive in the Great Lakes, in Lake St. Clair River, which has a current that you're like this half the time hanging on. And when I got to university, someone said, whoever told you never get in the field? Of course you do. So I flipped it around and I started out, you know, at University of Toronto. I did anthropology. And at our field school, I was saying it was run by Parks Canada in Windsor. And I said, there was battles off here. There have to be wrecks and stuff. And they said, oh yeah, Parks Canada is excavating the King's Navy Yard down the road. And they introduced me. And by the end of the summer, I was sent out to Labrador to dive on a 1565 Basque whaling ship. And I never looked back. This year is, like I say, this is my 50th year in diving. I quit teaching 2 years ago. I figured, well, one, Patty sold out to China and our insurance tripled. And I don't charge anything when I teach for diving. So I was like, no, that's way too much, even for a write-off. And then the membership went up. And I thought, well, you've got this far and you haven't killed yourself or anyone else. Let's not teach anymore. But I said, this year is my 50th year in diving. So I get my dives in this year. And then I'll just save them I work for my post. What I've been doing is a side gig since 2000, working for high-end travel companies. I work for Zagram Expeditions. Now I work for Abercrombie and Kent. And I don't lead dives. I did for Zagram, but they hire their own dive masters. And I never told them I'm a master instructor because that's like 2 steps up. And I don't want to be responsible for a bunch of well-fed tourists who haven't dove in a very long time. But I would go down with them. And of course, we're diving Bikini Atoll. And the shallowest dive we can make is through the top of the Saratoga, which was an aircraft carrier. Just go down and through the bridge and up. And there were so many oceanic white tips, and they're not scared of people because no one's lived there or fished them. And I'm the last person, and I'm going, they always eat the last one. So I grabbed the fattest, chubbiest first. I went through with them at the very end together. I said, we're going together on this, you know, and, so I'm going to stick with, you know, I've been, you know, the diving here. I thought, I worked in Thailand for 3 years. I'm on the Cambodian border with crappy visibility. It was not Phuket. Labrador had okay visibility. I came down, I thought, I'm going to have great visibility. The Chesapeake has almost zero visibility 99% of the time. If we get out to the Atlantic, the first 30 feet are like coffee, and then you might get some viz below that. And you're trying to take measurements, and this giant, you know, wall of flesh goes by, all the sand tigers, and you're like, I forget what that number was. You know, but, yeah, it's fine, but you know, it's been interesting, and but I think when I retire, I'm going to try and write this up. This has been a long time coming. And I put 4 boxes in the middle of my kitchen thinking, if you have to walk around them, you'll get down to business. I walked around them for 5 years. They make coffee tables. Yeah. So now I gotta get to work.
Perfect. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Appreciate your forbearance with the technical stuff, but and I'm happy if I can send it to you on a drive. You can put it somewhere else that people can see it or whatever. But in any case, thank you all. And now I'm going to go probably have something better than coffee. So.